What's up everyone, Skimmy here. I know a lot of you have been after this video for quite some time now and we finally got around to making it, so this will be my updated guide for Shadow Priest in MOP Classic. For those of you that don't know me or have never seen one of my videos, a little bit about myself is that I've been making these since Wrath of the Lich King Classic, really. I've been enjoying the nostalgia of going down memory lane and at the same time playing an underdog spec, right, which tends to underperform or get a negative press compared to, you know, mages or warlocks or whatever. So trying to change the narrative around that Shadow Priests suck and that, you know, we always pay the utility tax price. Whilst that can certainly be true at times, we can definitely hang with the best if we know what we're doing from a class and fight perspective. And last week I was fortunate enough to get myself 3 rank 1s on the launch of Heart of Fear, and hopefully by the end of this guide you'll have learned a thing or two to help reach those numbers yourself as well. Now, going into MOP, one of the biggest changes was the overhaul to the talent system, and you know, gone are the days of having 40 different points to play around with, figure out, and well, basically never change again. So that's all gone away. We've now got 6 rows to tinker around with based on the kind of content we're up to, be it dailies, PvP, or raids, like we have here, right? So I've added a cheat sheet as to what I take based on the boss, and we can sort of discuss the logic as to why we take what we do. So with the first talent here, it's not that impactful. You'll see even on Zorlok, I untalent it completely because you know, it's just one less way to grief the raid if I get mind controlled. It's a utility talent here, right? So it doesn't really matter all too much. I wouldn't stress this one whatsoever. You get to your second row, you've got Angelic Feather. This for me is the GOAT. It's non-negotiable. It's really, really strong in this version of the game. So don't really consider anything else in my opinion, because if you look at Body and Soul, you might have played it in retail and thought, hey, that's quite handy as a quality of life buff. My problem with that though is that the shield, I mean, Healing Priest is going to be better for that, as well as if you've got that debuff, you can't get the movement speed when you really need it, right? So Angelic Feather is the best pick for me, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. With the next tier, you can choose all 3 options, although surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, Solace and Insanity is the best option. It's the biggest boost for our single target, which is what Shadow Priest needs. But the likes of Mindbender and From Darkness Comes Light comes you know, a fair bit of value as well. For Stone Guard in particular, I run Mindbender just because I get to stand still. We get the Hunters to do all the painting, and you know, you get to cleave all 4 dogs together, pop your Mindbender. You're never ever going to hit Mind Flay because you're going to be doing Mind Sear instead, and you can focus on that. If you're doing a different strategy, perhaps you're painting as well, then yeah, From Darkness Comes Light could be quite handy as well. Just because it gives you the ability to cast something as you're running around, which can sometimes feel a little bit awkward for Shadow Priest, right? Because if you're not in execute phase, what are you going to do, right? You're going to be hitting Shadow Web Pain resets. It's nothing too fancy. With the next talent here, Angelic Bulwark for me is the go. Is you know, just another nice little, not a cheat death proc, but certainly a substantial HP buffer when you get low. I think to the days of, like, you know, the final phase of Syndragosa, everybody's like running around having to LOS because their stacks are getting too high, and you're just like standing still with Vampiric Embrace blasting. So adds to that, makes you feel still fairly tanky, fairly durable. The only time I would untalent this would be on Amber Shaper. I'd go for Desperate Prayer instead. Reason being, if you become the construct, the Bulwark shield scales with the construct, and you can suddenly get like a 2 mil shield. So yeah, everyone will be laughing at you. And look, don't be that guy. I've been there once. Lastly, or actually second to last, we've got the argument between Power Infusion and Twist of Fate. Unfortunately for me, Divine Insight is really, really far behind. Can't really make an argument for it this phase. Perhaps later on. Unsure. These two are just so incredibly strong. The argument for me between these are, if you can get at least 50% uptime, then Twist of Fate's going to be better. Otherwise, Power Infusion. And the reason being is, you know, if you've got plenty of different adds throughout the fight that you can snipe, you know, that Shadow Web Deaths, that's more Shadow Orbs, that's more, you know, flat bonus damage from having that proc up all the time, it's a really big deal. But if it's a flat single target fight, like, you know, Fang or Blade Lord, PI is going to be a little bit nicer, and you know, you can line those up quite nicely to have one in the opener, one in the execute phase or second pot, and you know, really get some good value there. Lastly, Halo is by far our strongest level 90 talent. Obviously the caveat is you need to be a fair distance away from the boss to make sure it ramps up its damage, and there are arguments to take Cascade, and those would be for just Elegon and Garelon at this point. And Divine you know, Divine Sight has its purpose, but in raiding, only if you're ever forced to do like a hard stack strategy, or like in Celestial Dungeons when you're farming, it's going to be the superior choice there, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second as well. So the reason I like this version of Angelic Feather so much compared to what we have in retail is, well, first of all, just comparing them side by side, you've got double the movement speed, it lasts a second longer, and then the cooldown time is halved. I mean, that for me is a no-brainer. It's crazy how much we go from being a wheelchair class that gets a mechanic and goes, GG, boots are on cooldown, I can't do anything now, to like, hey, 80% move speed for 6 seconds. It's hard to not have it up and available, I suppose is what I'm getting at here, right? Whereas you compare it to retail and you're like, GG, no Warlock Gate or no Evoker, Rescue, Grip, whatever it may be. I can't deal with these mechanics, and yeah, it feels bad, man. I've been there when I played retail recently. So having this feather now in MOP feels so good that you can be the speedy class and you can get to laugh at other people, right? Like obviously Blade Lord in Hoth where everyone goes super zoom. I'm never last, all right? So hey, that's a massive improvement over what we've had in previous expansions for Classic. In terms of the other talents as well, so for level 90, as I mentioned before, we've got Halo as our default. Now, the condition is, yeah, at least 20 yards and above, and that's going to always be a DPS boost. If you are going to be forced to stack in melee, because that's the strategy on the boss, or if you're just farming your Celestial dungeons, right, to get your character geared, Divine Star is going to be far better. Divine Star is just going to smooth it out and do more damage if you're closer to that target. And at this point, yeah, Elegon and Garalon will be the only arguments for when you'd be taking Cascade. Otherwise, yeah, just get comfortable with using Halo, having like a Weakauras or an add-on or some way of tracking your distance, and weaving that in terms of the spell priority, which we'll cover shortly. Now, like any class, there's obviously a stat priority which is beneficial or they're best in slot, right? But before you even consider that, I would say that 9 times out of 10, item level is the overall winner, just because you're getting so much extra stamina, raw main stats, secondary, sometimes socket bonuses, and a combination of that spread across so many different item slots, that alone tends to just be flat out better. But obviously it should never be the expense of making sure to hit these major points, which is easier than ever now to do, right? So in terms of hit cap, you want to hit 15%. That's what that blue line is on the graph below. After that point, reforge, regem, re-enchant, don't bother with it anymore. Just because you don't need it, right? So 15%, easier than ever, as I said before. You've got hit rating, we convert Spirit as a passive into hit as well, and now Expertise counts for casters as hits. So 15% is the magic number there. Right after that, then our number one priority as a dot focus class is Haste. And 8085 is the number you're going to be seeing a lot in the next few slides. It's a major breakpoint in terms of when our Haste just gives us extra damage through extra dot ticks. At this stage in Phase 1, Crit is just ever so slightly better than Mastery, but as we go later into the expansion with different tier sets, with different items available, that relationship will ping pong back and forward. To help understand why Haste is so important for us, you first need to understand what it does for our dots. So you'll see here our 3 main dots we'll be using in MOP Classic. They all have a fixed duration, and within that time they'll be doing a set amount of damaging ticks. So the more haste you have, it's not only going to reduce how long it takes to cast your spells, it's going to reduce your global cooldown, make the gameplay feel smoother, rotation feel nicer. It's also going to add additional ticks within that same amount of time. So for instance, Devouring Plague might instead do 8 ticks of damage instead of 6 within that same 6-second period. Now, with the breakpoints, the first one, super easy to achieve. You get 5% baseline from your Shadow Form, and the rest, quite honestly, I'm sure anybody, even somebody in full Boosty Boy green gear, is going to be able to hit this first tick, no drama. The real kicker, the real one you want to dial in on and focus and hit as quickly as possible is 8085. That's 2 extra ticks of Shadow Word Pain, and conveniently enough, it's 2 extra ticks of Devouring Plague as well. And that's the name of the game in this expansion, is to build and spend orbs and cast the spell as often as you possibly can. Now, certainly with enough raid gear, enough item level, 30% is going to be achievable, and definitely later down the line come Throne of Thunder as well as Siege of Ogrimmar, 14k, 18k, that'll be achievable as well. So in terms of late game scaling, when you talk about the argument of us, Affliction Warlocks, Fire Mages and so on, this is what they're referring to, right? Certain benchmarks areas that won't become obtainable unless we have enough gear to make it possible. But definitely the relationship between 8085 and 10k, play around in the MOP sim. It's not necessarily worth just jamming pure haste to hit it. And you might not have to once you have access to tier 14 4-piece, because that's going to increase the duration of both Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch by 3 seconds. That's going to give you an additional tick for free by default, and it's also going to change the Haste Breakpoints once again. So if you've got a bit of a keen eye, you'll note that Vampiric Touch looks like the formula used for Shadow Word Pain in the previous slide. That means it's adopted those Haste Breakpoints, and once again 8085 becomes front and center the haste rating to work towards. So depending on your gearing situation, you're going to want to gem match with Quick Suns and Energized Wild Jade very early on to try and hit that 8085 as quickly as you can. Obviously you've got Reforging, you've got Enchants and so on that make it a little bit easier as well, but definitely depending on your situation, maybe you're a fresh level 90 or just been really unlucky with raid loot and it's not dropped any haste gear, you're going to want to use these to try and hit that point as quickly as you can. But if you're playing around in the MOP sim and if you're comfortable with it and you're realizing that, hey, it's no longer worth chasing the next breakpoint afterwards, I'm sacrificing too much of intellect, for example, then that's when you're going to start to swap these out for the Reckless and Purified gems instead. As the expansion goes on, we've got a lot of stat scaling to play with, right? So comparing two weapons from Phase 1 and Phase 5, you can see right off the bat, you've got double the spell power, a ton, basically double the stamina as well, but a ton of raw intellect to play with, a soccer bonus, which is always a nice addition, and same to be found on secondaries with your rings, right? So you've got, again, double the health, a ton of intellect to play with, and all that secondary, nearly double again there too. So you times this by 8 in equivalent slots, and you can quite clearly see just how powerful it's going to be with the stat scaling. You'll hit certain breakpoints, you'll be able to hit GCD cap, and scaling classes like ourselves, Fire Mage and all the rest are going to have such a fun time, and that's when you're going to truly feel like Thanos and feel rewarded for sticking it out when you suck at the start, but by the end game of an expansion you're up there with the best. Right, so now that we got ourselves all set with housekeeping, we're running the right talents, we've got our gear in check and our stats to match, it's time to start playing the game. And in terms of a pre-pull ritual, what I like to do is stand at least 28 yards away from the boss. Whilst it's a little bit difficult nowadays with Weakauras, as they make you guesstimate between 25 and 30, if you stand at this distance, because Halo has a travel time, if you cast at 2.5 seconds on your pre-pull countdown timer, then it's going to connect with that boss on 0 from that distance. Obviously, if you stand closer, then adjust the timer accordingly. But this just makes it do as much damage as possible when you can control that distance, especially in a pre-pull situation. A second before you go, I hit my pop. Then I do Mind Spike instead of Vampiric Touch, just because I'm looking to try and activate as many ways as possible to pop passive trinkets, to activate Jade Spirit Weapon Enchant, that when I eventually hit things like Berserking, PI, and Engineering Gloves, you've got so many active buffs available that you're empowering that first round of dots to be as strong as possible, right? The idea of snapshotting, if you will. So once you've got that first set of dots up and active, before I go into Mind Flay Insanity spamming, because you are always building orbs and then spending them, you want to make sure you're pressing Mind Blast on cooldown. So you hit that next and then go into Mind Flay Insanity spamming. Now, one really exciting part of MOP is the change to Shadow Fiend. This can now actually be cast after Bloodlust and it will still receive that buff. Gone are the days of, hey, I've just hit my Shadow Fiend, guys, second lust, please. Doesn't matter anymore. It will dynamically update after it's spawned. It's going to go up. Bloodlust is active and it's going to respond in that fashion. So it's a really nice quality of life buff and smooths out the rotation compared to, say, Dragon Soul or Traxian. You're like, guys, can I get a last? And they're like, nah, it will grief our healers, and you just, feels bad, man. Once we finish our opener, here's the spell priority I like to follow, which, name of the game, as I said before, it all revolves around building and spending Shadow Orbs. Very different to Cataclysm, where it was all RNG based. Now we have full control as to when we get them, so we want to make sure we have perfect uptime on that. So, the Varying Plague, you only ever want to cast this at 3 orbs. With Mind Blast, we prioritize over Mind Flay Insanity in the opener. In Execute phase, Shadow Word Death obviously gets added into the mix. Always use these spells on cooldown and plan ahead, because that really is the name of the game. We are a juggling act as Shadow Priest, right? Juggling multiple plates at once to try and min-max our value, and that's where the skill expression can certainly come from. After this point, Mind Flay Insanity has perfect harmony with Devouring Plagues. You want to try and channel as many of those as possible, and then assuming you already have your dots up and active, you'd want to make sure you're refreshing them at this point. And below I've got a little bit of a disclaimer about this, right? So the planning ahead aspect, you want to make sure that both Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch would have at least 8 seconds remaining before you cast Devouring Plague, and that way you just have the ability to chain those Insanity Mind Flays one after the other and do as much damage as possible. So, you know, by planning ahead, you're not bottlenecking yourself. You're not, you know, gimping your damage and trolling your output to make us look worse than we are. Come on, guys, we've got to make Shadow Priest look strong. After this point, from darkness comes light. Yeah, if you're running this talent, this is when you'd be using those procs. Really, really handy, especially when you're on the move. It fills in that dead space when you can't do Mind Flay or you know, cast a dot refresh. If you're able to stand at least 20 yards away, this is when you'd want to prioritize things like Halo, and otherwise, Mind Flay regular is your short filler spell. Does a fair bit of damage, so don't get too obsessed with ideas of snapshotting. Regular Mind Flay still does pack a bit of a punch, but if any of the above spells were needing to be refreshed or used because they've come off cooldown, obviously that's when you would interrupt it. Now, the reason why Mind Flay Insanity is so highly prioritized is, well, you know, first of all, Devouring Plague buffs it by 33% for each orb that's used. So, assuming we're only ever using it with 3 orbs, each Mind Flay Insanity is doing 100% bonus damage, which is, you know, a pretty big deal and a significant boost to our single target, which is what is lacking at the moment. One of the ways you can edge out even further DPS gains is to recast Mind Flay Insanity just before Devouring Plague falls off, and it's going to snapshot and retain that damage for the entire channel, which is a pretty big deal, right? So if you were to compare yourself once again to another different Shadow Priest and so like, whoa, what are they doing? You could compare just how much damage their Mind Flay Insanity did compared to yours, linking it to how many Devouring Plagues they cast. Look, you can go down that rabbit hole if you want to truly min-max. You can get a bit of insight as to like, why are they doing more? And a lot of the time this is going to come down to understanding these mechanics and sort of how to play around that. I get a lot of comments from you guys asking what Weakauras and add-ons I'm using. Each time I upload a video, in the description I include this link that you see on the bottom of your screen right there. That'll take you to this Google spreadsheet, which includes all the add-ons I'm using, any relevant profiles for them. You've got the Weakauras links as well. And very recently I started adding these gifts too, just so you can get a bit of a preview as to what they're all about. Perhaps if you're on the fence, you're curious, you're not too sure what the benefit of them are, you can you know, get a very quick and easy glimpse as to what it's all about. So yeah, tinyurl.com/skimmynz. Check it out and let me know how you're going. And then lastly, we have macros, which, honestly speaking, are just as important, I'd say, as your Weakauras and add-ons, because they can combine multiple button presses into one. They can just, you know, smooth out the gameplay and just act as a nice quality of life change. So, in the top left corner, you'll see my CDs button, and this will just activate everything at once, which is Berserking, PI if talented, use 10 as your engineering gloves, and then use 13 and 14 would be your trinkets. And this works wonders at the moment, right, because we're running double passive trinkets, so everything activates at once and there's no cooldown to contend with. With Shadow Fiend, this one here, rather simple at first because it just casts your Shadow Fiend and makes sure that the pet is attacking, but it also does what I have added into basically every other spell, like Mind Blast, all my dots, as well as Shadow Word Death to the right. On first pass, it will say, are you targeting an enemy? And if none exist, then it's going to look to make sure that you are. And if the target you're currently attacking is now dead and you can't harm it anymore, then it's going to run this all again and look to try and find something new. And this is really, really handy, especially for things like Shadow Word Death, where you've got like a bunch of small ads constantly spawning and you're trying to snipe them for, you know, Twist of Fate procs as well as Shadow Orbs. You're like, oh, I've got to quickly get in there, man. Like, what the hell's happening? And then you're spamming this button. It's going to get it done for you, and you're going to thank me in the comments in a later video. Later on, you got Sod, and look, I love this button. My Sod button, this, thank you very much, ChatGPT, just says, all right, what level 90 talent are you taking? I'll update the tooltip based on that, and you never have to keep dragging and dropping from your talents onto your action bars. Then you got Dispersion. This one, yeah, you first cast, it's going to make sure that the buff's active. You cast it again, it's going to cancel. Very similar to what you would have seen with, like, you know, Bubbles or Bops for Pallies. And then lastly, Feather. Another reason why this is just the GOAT is because you can remove the targeting reticle completely and just cast this at your own feet, and that way you've always, you know, got that Hot Wheels energy just to blast around the map and laugh at everybody else now being in a wheelchair in this expansion. So those are the macros I run. One thing, if you want to be super, super sweaty, I saw this discussed in the Shadow Priest Discord the other day, and I know there's some Weakauras out there that can do it for you, those little talent calculators, but it's been found that you can actually type this command out and it will switch the talent for you without using a tome. Now, this is kind of insane because you can now, on your second action bar row, just quickly toggle between bosses or trash packs and have no downtime, no click confirmation, just switch between any talent choice at your leisure, and, you know, be a good raider, be a good contributor. And Look, I use this all the time, quite honestly, when I'm like switching out for PvP, for open world dailies, into dungeons, into raids. It's really crazy, and I'm curious to see if Blizzard will change this, or if they'll let this one fly, because as it stands, this is a nice little quality of life buff as well. But that about wraps it up for my guide. Let me know what you thought in the comments section. Any questions, anything I didn't cover, anything you want to discuss about. Obviously, when the new Raid and Terrace comes out, we'll discuss that one as well, and we'll make a part 2.